Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome members of the general public and staff to the January 28, 2021 meeting of the Halifax Water Board of Commissioners and public portion. In advance of getting started, we would like to acknowledge that today is Bell Let's Talk Day, a day that encourages everyone to talk about mental health, help each other through difficult times, and break down the stigma associated with mental health. So we would encourage everyone to please use the hashtag Bell Let's Talk today on social media to raise awareness and money for mental health illness. And with that, we will start our meeting with item 1A, which is ratification of in-camera motions. Can I please have a motion from board member, please?
Commissioner Rawlings can make that move.
I second.
Okay, duly moved and seconded. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any objections? Abstentions? Motion carried. Approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. I don't believe we have any planned additions or deletions for the agenda, so can I have approval of the agenda, please?
I so move.
I'll
Thank
second.
you. Thank you very much. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Objections? Abstentions? Motion carried. Okay, next is the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting held on Thursday, November 26th, 2020. You've all received copies of the minutes and reviewed them. Did anybody notice any omissions or deletions in the minutes? Hearing none, can I have a motion for acceptance of the minutes for the Thursday, November 26th, 2020 board meeting, please?
Commissioner Rawlings, I move that the Halifax Water approve the minutes of the November 26, 2020 regular meeting.
Thank you. Second by Councillor Lovelace. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Objections? Abstentions? Or okay, motion carried. Business arising from minutes, and we have one item that we have to deal with, and it's putting a new member on one of our subcommittees of environment and health and safety. Can I have a motion, please? This was the item that was discussed.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Kent, I'm happy to put that on the floor.
Could you
I move
read? Thank you, Commissioner Kent. Sorry.
I move that Halifax Water Board appoint Councillor Kathy Daigle-Gammon to the Environment, Health and Safety Committee of the Board effective today. So moved.
Thank you very much. Seconded by Councillor Lovelace. I don't believe it requires any discussion. We're not going to let her escape now. So, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any objections? Abstentions? Motion carried. Thank you very much, Councillor Daigle-Gammon. So we'll move on now to item 4.1, which is the operating results for the 9 months ended December 31st, 2020. And I believe, Louis, you're speaking to this?
I think the challenge is whether or not we wanted a presentation or not. Happy to speak to it if you don't. If not, we do have a presentation that's very short if you'd like that as well.
I think it's worthwhile to do the short presentation.
Okay. Alicia Scallion, who's our manager of accounting, has volunteered to do the presentation. So if Alicia can come on and do that, that would be great.
Hello, I'm Alicia Scallion, Manager of Accounting for Halifax Water, and I'm here to present the operating results for the 9 months ended December 31st, 2020. Next slide, please. We'll begin with the statement of financial position, where we can see that our current assets have increased 4.4 million, primarily a result of an increase in our cash balance due to lower capital expenditures in the current year. Our non-current assets, the increase of 29.4 million is largely a result of, sorry, I'm reading the wrong line. Non-current assets have increased due to significant capital additions at year-end last year. Next slide, please. Our liabilities and equity have increased. The key items to note: current liabilities have increased due to some accruals for capital projects, as well as payroll remittances that were remitted in early January 2021. Our long-term debt has increased. We acquired 25 million in new debt last year and have made repayments of 19.5 million. Next slide. As of December 31st, we had a loss of 2.9 million. This is driven by a decrease in consumption revenues, largely due to a decrease in the commercial sector. Our operating expenditures have gone up. This is mostly due to wage rate increases, an increase in depreciation from our capital additions last year, as well as debt servicing costs. Our financial and other expenditures have, overall expenditures have increased due to depreciation and debt servicing costs. Next slide, please. This slide breaks down our operating revenues a bit further, where we can see the main driver is consumption revenue. And our final slide, we can see the breakdown of earnings by service line. So our water services has gone down from the prior year, again, mainly due to depreciation, higher wages from wage rate increases, and a decrease in consumption charges. This is the trend for wastewater services as well as stormwater services, and same goes for our regulated and unregulated activities. Are there any questions?
I have one. I think, Alicia, I have a question.
Sure.
First of all, thank you very much for the presentation. The question is just a result of the, I guess, the outreach that we did to customers where we stopped doing shutoffs and stopped charging interest as part of COVID response. And I was wondering if you've noticed any material change in receivables or bad debt expense because of that.
I can help with that. Our receivables are stayed relatively consistent with previous years. What we've noticed is the age of our receivables continues to get longer. Currently, they're at about 40% of our receivables are over 60 days, which is higher than we would want it to be. So that's the main thing that we're seeing now. We did see a decrease in our revenues related to interest that we would have charged on late payments for that period.
Okay. In general, you're not having lots of customers default on payment, I guess. No. Okay, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you very much.
Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? Hearing none. Thanks very much, Alicia. Do appreciate the presentation. Let's move to item 4.2, the proposed 2021-22 business plan. Kathy. You're muted, Kathy.
Thank you. I have a presentation that is only about 9 slides. I'll try to do this quickly to help the board make up some time on our agenda. There is nothing in this that is not familiar to the board because it was reviewed for the most part at a board workshop on January 5th. The next slide, Jake, and you can move along to the next slide. So we're presenting the 21-22 business plan. This presentation really just summarizes some of the strategic objectives. On the board package, which is located on the internet, members of the public can see the full business plan. We will also be producing a shorter version, 6-page document that's a summary of a strategic plan for Halifax Water for next year, following board approval of the business plan. So the business plan we're recommending reflects the 5-year business plan that the Halifax Water Board approved in November 2019. It does reflect our consideration of feedback that the board provided in a workshop in January. And after the Halifax Water Board approves the business plan, the next step is that it gets presented to Halifax Council in February. And the purpose of that really isn't an approval. It's so the municipality has an opportunity to provide any feedback to Halifax Water and ensure that our strategic plans are in alignment with the municipality's strategic plan. Next slide. So I'm going to quickly run through the strategic objectives from the main areas of the utility. April 1st, we are going to be operating in a slightly different structure. Formerly, we had 2 operations departments, one for water services, one for wastewater, stormwater services. We're bringing them together effective April 1st, but we're still reflecting our strategic objectives by the different regulated service areas. So I'm going to first talk about water services, then I'm going to talk about wastewater, stormwater operations. So for water operations, our goals next year include completion of a water quality master plan. This will be the 4th version of the water quality master plan. Halifax Water's had a water quality master plan in place for several years. The next strategic objective is completion of the approval process to secure approval for a water supply enhancement program. Halifax Water has a need to upgrade our 2 major water treatment plants, J.D. Klein and Lake Major. The water supply enhancement program will see the utility spend about $230 million over a 10-year time frame to address many concerns. One would be the age of some of those assets, changing source water quality conditions, and the need to make our systems robust enough to deal with new concerns that are emerging, for example, algae in source water. So the 3rd objective for water services is to fully implement an enhanced algal monitoring program next year. You may recall we started a temporary algal monitoring program this year, and it's been very successful, and we've determined that it's something we need to be doing on a permanent and ongoing basis. So we will be making that program permanent starting next year. Our next strategic objective relates to the lead service line program. So last year, the Halifax Water Board had approved enhancements to the lead service line replacement program that got submitted to the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board. They have approved our expanded lead service line replacement program. And so this is really the first year or first construction season where we will be advertising that program and doing a full reimbursement for replacement of the private portion of lead service lines under certain situations, and really trying to get the best bang for our buck with lead service line replacements through coordination with the municipality's street renewal program. Also, dam safety is an important topic. The Halifax Water Board received the results of a dam safety review at the November board meeting. And next year, we will be implementing the findings from the dam safety review. Another objective under water services is to develop a roadmap for data utilization and intelligent water. So the technology used in the water industry is really advancing quite rapidly. We also have invested in new systems over the last few years, and such as the advanced metering infrastructure system. And we'll be looking at what is our roadmap on a go-forward basis to start using other new and emerging types of technology or machine learning to help us advance how we actually operate the system. Finally, the water loss control program is something that's been in place at Halifax Water for a number of years. We'll be revisiting the water loss control program and looking at what the next steps are so we can continue pushing the goal forward to reduce water losses and to maintain a good infrastructure leakage index. Next slide, Jake. Wastewater and stormwater services also have a fairly aggressive set of strategic objectives. The first one is completion of a biosolids facility upgrade plan and to progress procurement for new capital and operating contracts. So we do have some contracts that are expiring March 31st, 2022. This is the year that we'll be progressing the project so we can make sure we have a strategy in place for handling of biosolids and contracts in place that will secure our strategy for biosolids for the next probably 15 to 20 year period. The second objective under wastewater and stormwater services is to continue to implement the wastewater research program that we started this year as per a plan submitted to NSERC. So right now we would be entering into the second year of a 3-year program through a partnership with Dalhousie University and NSERC. Our next objective is to consult stakeholders on the plan for the Harbor Solutions Plant upgrades to meet 2040 compliance. We have a number of initiatives planned for next year that actually will involve stakeholder consultation, that when you're reading through the business plan, you'll see a lot of references to stakeholder consultations around Harbor Solutions Plant upgrades, the regional development charge, stormwater services, and also customer related issues. Next, we'll be looking at completing the wet weather management projects that are planned for the year and initiating possible changes to enable effective private side I&I reduction. This is something that the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board has been suggesting that we should investigate. I&I is an acronym for inflow and infiltration, and it refers to water getting into our wastewater collection system that we really don't want to be in our wastewater collection system. Finally, we'll be communicating and implementing actions from the odor strategy. So one of the current year business plan objectives was to review our service levels and our strategy for dealing with odor around our wastewater treatment facilities. A report on that should be coming back to the Halifax Water Board in March. And after that, in our next year's business plan, we'll be looking at implementing any actions that come forward under that strategy. Next slide. Engineering and technology services has an aggressive set of objectives, and some of them are very much related to some of the things we've already discussed under water and wastewater. But the first one links to our corporate balance scorecard. So the Halifax Water Board has given Halifax Water staff an objective to deliver a certain percentage of the annual capital budget within the fiscal year. So we're continuing to work on optimizing our capital project delivery to make sure that we're achieving that 80% level of annual capital spend. The second objective relates to completing the design and tender process for the Burnside Depot construction. We're currently at the design phase and that work is underway. It will be continuing into next year. The third strategic objective, which is very important, is to keep ourselves aligned with the municipality and to the progress on the Cogswell redevelopment. There's a lot of existing infrastructure down there for water, wastewater, and stormwater that we have to be mindful of getting relocated correctly as part of the Cogswell redevelopment. And we also have to ensure that there are plans in place to maintain service to customers in that area through the duration of the project. The fourth objective relates to the multi-year water supply enhancement program that I spoke to when I was speaking about water services operations. Next year's specific component is to implement a clarifier project, which I believe Jamie Hannum will be talking about later on when we get to the capital budget. We have a number of significant IT projects. The most significant next year that we want to deliver are related to cybersecurity and a new ERP system, an enterprise resource planning system. And that currently is before the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board. We're seeking approval for the capital project to proceed with the ERP. We're expecting we would receive a decision approving that probably around April or May. Next, we're looking at finalizing levels of service for asset management, and we're also doing an evaluation of Halifax Water's asset management program. It's a good time for a bit of a reset, And in terms of the service level work that's going on, we're trying to integrate and articulate what is our customer level of service we want to achieve, what are our operational levels of service, what are our technical levels of service, and our asset management related levels of service. So that's a really interesting piece of work that when it is completed would be coming forward to the Halifax Water Board. Finally, we'll be monitoring and reporting on the progress of the Integrated Resource Plan. So Halifax Water updated the Integrated Resource Plan in 2019. It says that we need to spend approximately $4 billion over the next 30 years to upgrade water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure, or meet the new needs of new growth, or to maintain environmental compliance. So we are looking at how we monitor and report on the progress of the Integrated Resource Plan. Next slide. Regulatory Services is the department led by Kendra McKenzie, and this department has a lot of responsibility for initiatives related to development approvals, climate change, and our regulatory compliance. One of the things we'll be doing next year related to stakeholder consultation is implementing an annual stakeholder consultation with some of the groups that are involved with the regional development charge. Also, we'll be looking at expanding our existing environmental management system to a corporate-wide environmental management system, and that will be a 3-year program to expand our EMS system. It will commence April 1st next year. There's an ongoing objective that you would see every year under this department to maintain regulatory compliance and enhance our reporting. We're also looking at launching a new service account compliance program next year. We anticipate that's something that might come forward to the Halifax Water Board in September. We're also looking at safety and security, evaluating whether we should try to attain safety certification, ISO 45001 certification, and we're looking at completing a physical security audit. Because Halifax Water operates critical infrastructure, one of the expectations for utilities who are delivering critical infrastructure is that periodically you are doing physical security audit. It's important to protect the integrity of the infrastructure and the safety of the water supply in particular. We're also looking at our stormwater credit program and supporting updates to stormwater billing. And we're looking at developing a climate action plan for Halifax Water that supports Halifax 2050 and enhances coordination and reporting of climate change, adaptation, and mitigation initiatives. Next slide. The Corporate Services Department has a number of objectives. The first is to analyze an updated batch of satellite imagery and impervious area data, and we'll be considering whether or not we need to adjust rates for stormwater service. Stormwater service rates have not been adjusted since July 1st, 2017, I believe. And at this point in time, we can't say whether it would need to be an adjustment upward or downward. Basically, a rate process looks at how much we need to spend to deliver the service we're required to deliver. Then it would look at the new amount of impervious area and growth in customers since the rates were last adjusted, to come out with a recommendation in terms of what that would look like on a go-forward basis. We're also looking at our customer portal. We launched a new customer portal in November of this year, and we've got phase 2 enhancements that will occur sometime this spring. And really the focus in 21-22 will be in promoting that customer portal and the benefits that customers can get by subscribing to it, particularly as a tool to prevent surprises with high bills or water consumption by subscribing to a system that would enable them to get alerts and receive alerts when there might be high consumption or leakage at their property. If the URB approves our integrated resource project, our system that I'd spoken about earlier, then we would be commencing the design of that system and moving forward with implementation next year. We also have a goal to update our procurement policy and processes. Our procurement policy is being reviewed, and we're considering making some changes similar to ones the municipality had made last year. Particularly, some of the issues we're looking at is the buy local type issues, and also analysis and full life cycle costing, bringing that into consideration in how we review and award procurement processes. We've got ongoing work to improve our financial forecasting and reporting. That links back to our goal to also improve the rate of capital spend. For us to improve the rate of capital spend, we need to make sure we're accurately forecasting the progress on our capital projects and our rate of capital spend. We also have an initiative to update our cost of service manual, and we will be doing that before we would look for any adjustment to stormwater rates. And when we go through a cost of service manual update, it means that we do an application to the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board. There would be a public hearing, lots of opportunity for public participation, and the URB would have to approve those changes. Finally, we're looking at implementing a new bill design and monthly billing, and making some changes to our collection process. The changes we're looking at are designed to both enhance our communication with customers and also improve customers' ability to avoid high bills or surprises. So right now, the majority of Halifax Water customers are only receiving a bill every 3 months. Once we implement monthly billing, they would receive a bill on a monthly basis, and it would mean they have an opportunity to address issues while they're small before issues become larger. So that's something we're very excited about. And the bill design process is also something we see as an opportunity to maybe make our bills a little bit more understandable for customers. We're somewhat constrained with the system we use now in terms of what we can do with the bill design. So we're looking forward to making some changes there. Next slide. Under administration, we're looking at obtaining approval for new regulations governing the Cogswell District Energy System. We want to update our service level agreement with the municipality, which hasn't been looked at for a few years. We have a new code of conduct that the Halifax Water Board approved this fall, and we want to roll that out to all employees this year. We also have a risk management policy that was approved by the Halifax Water Board, and we want to roll that out to staff and do some risk management training and build a risk management culture at Halifax Water. And we'll be updating our risk registers and bringing some recommendations back to the board and doing a workshop with the board so that the board can give us some feedback on what are the corporate level risks you want to receive reporting on, and the board gets to establish tolerance levels and thresholds for what triggers a report to the board on a certain type of risk related issue. Finally, the dispute resolution officer, although not an employee of Halifax Water does have a kind of intermediary role in terms of making sure that there is a dispute resolution officer. The first dispute resolution officer had a 5-year contract that will end March 31st, 2022. So we'll be having conversations with the current dispute resolution officer and the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board to initiate a process to ensure that there is a new dispute resolution officer put in place for the end of that contract, and ensuring that there's a smooth transition and handoff so that there's no interruption in the dispute resolution process for our customers. Finally, we've got an objective related to enhancing stormwater customer communication and education. This was something that the board did ask us to do and talked about at our workshop, as well as broader customer communication on the water cycle and the value of water. Finally, we're looking at how we align with the municipality's culture and diversity initiatives. We try to stay aligned as much as we can. One of the things we'd like to do next year is to complete unconscious bias training for all of our managers and supervisors. So those are our most strategic objectives. I'm going to ask Jake to go to the next slide. And the summary, the objectives that are in our 21-22 business plan, there's a cost to delivering them. The capital budget requirement is $126.2 million. Jamie Hannon will be speaking to the capital budget in a separate presentation. The operating budget requirement, we've got about $155 million required in total expenditures. So that would be the operating expenditures and non-operating expenditures to support water, wastewater, and stormwater services next year. There are many business risks that we have to manage in order to achieve the business plan. Most notably is the ongoing risk caused by COVID-19. And finally, performance of our achievement of our business plan and our corporate goals and objectives is augmented by a performance measurement under the corporate balance scorecard. The proposed key performance and organizational indicators are going to be brought to the Halifax Water Board at the next board meeting in March. We really needed to get the business plan approved before we look at what we'll be doing with the performance measurement for this year. Thank you. We can take any questions.
Thanks very much, Kathy. Prior to taking questions, ladies and gentlemen, as Kathy mentioned, this is going to require some approval, and that the next step is for it to go to Halifax Council. So prior to any discussion, can I have a motion on the floor, please?
I will.
Ted, you read the motion.
I move that the Halifax Water Board approve the 2021-22 business plan in the substantive form attached and direct the general manager to submit the annual business plan to Halifax Council for approval.
Thanks, Ted.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you very much. So, any questions for Kathy, ladies and gentlemen?
Actually, I do. Sorry, I was just trying to write it in the comment field, in the chat field, and kind of got lost there in the little, in the little space that I have on my screen. So I just wanted to raise the fact around the climate action plan, and just to, you know, while Halifax is our HRM climate action plan, we also do have that larger provincial requirement under the Coastal Protections Act. So I just wanted to find out whether or not that's on your radar. It is new legislation. You know, many of the policies are just beginning to be developed and rolled out and so on. So I did want to raise that with you as something just to keep a lookout for. The other thing that I wanted to just raise, you know, the I&I issue with new development. Right now, we've got some areas with significant rapid development, you know, and trying to get those houses built for people that need them. And I'm just wondering, from a policy perspective, you know, is our policy adequate to ensure that, you know, those ongoing discussions around stormwater management and stormwater quality control is taking place, or, you know, is there room for improvement within some of those policies to protect that stormwater during, you know, these significant, rapid, large developments? Thank you.
I think Kenda can probably address both these questions. If you want to start, Kenda, and then I'll jump in if I want to add anything.
Certainly, thank you. So with the climate action plan, we are just starting to formalize our steering committee and get staff fully engaged and map all of that out. And there'll be subsequent presentations made to the Environmental Health and Safety Committee at the upcoming meeting, February, March, whenever that is scheduled for. So the coastal protection policy, yes, we're aware of that, and all of those programs, policies, we will be gathering all of those together. We are evaluating what impacts and touches Halifax Water. So we've gone through, for example, the Halifax document, and we're identifying key things that are going to be touching our business and our processes. So we are going to be gathering and providing a comprehensive document as the climate action plan evolves and gets finalized. With respect to I&I think there might be two issues. When we talk about inflow and infiltration, it's about extraneous water getting into the wastewater system. And when we talk about extraneous water, that could be, sump pump connected to the wastewater system or roof leaders connected to the wastewater system. So with the new development that's occurring, those types of connections aren't happening. However, I believe some of your concerns might be related to sediment and erosion control measures as these areas get developed and the speed at which they are developing. We are working closely with HRM. There's different rule sets and bylaws that apply. And so our staff have been conducting investigations as we become aware of them. If there are sediment issues getting into our system, that could be ultimately getting into a water body. And so we're being mindful of the water quality issues related to that, and working side by side with HRM's development engineering group on managing the various different contractors and activities that are occurring in these areas.
Okay, thank you. That was my error. All of the new acronyms that we're learning, I just, kind of sounds fancy. No, but I take your point. So there may be policy issues as well on HRMs, and that we need to review to protect that water flow. Thank you so much.
Councillor Deagle-Gammon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Kathy, for a very succinct review of a very ambitious business plan, I think. And looking at the procurement and updating the policies and some social procurement lens is going to be welcomed, I think, by a lot of people around buying local, buying social, and looking at living wage and some contracting and that kind of stuff is going to be great. I am curious about the dispute resolution officer. And only when you're looking at that, is that just one position? And is that one position sufficient to meet the timeliness of people's concerns and stuff? And so will there be a review to see if that needs to be more than one position?
Currently our regulations and the funding approved from DERO process within our rates only permits for one. That is something, though, that, for instance, with the last rate hearing, we did present information on the number of complaints handled, the cost of the process, and it's some performance metrics, so that both the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board and interveners, which is the consumer advocate, had the information in front of them so that they could consider, and if there was any dissatisfaction with that process, they had an opportunity that they could have asked us to make adjustments. So because that review happened at a public hearing as part of our rate hearing last June, we've had a relatively recent look at that, and for now we think we're okay with one.
Thank you.
Okay. I don't see any other further questions. Kind of last call for questions. All right, hearing none, we've had a motion on the floor. Can all in favor please signify by saying aye?
Aye.
Aye. Any objections? Abstentions? Motion carried. Next item on the agenda is the proposed 2021 capital budget. The illustrious Mr. Hannum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Consistent with the just approved annual business plan, item 4.3 on the agenda is the 2021 annual capital budget. The report itself that was in the package includes an overview summary of the content of the capital budget, and attached is the detailed line-by-line annual capital program. And it's important to note that a version of this budget with some minor edits subsequently was reviewed and endorsed by the Finance and Audit Committee in early December. And with their endorsement, we've bringing it here today for your consideration. I do have a presentation that I'm going to walk through quickly that provides a little context for what the capital budget is attempting to achieve in a utility context, and then provides a summary of the content of the budget. So let's roll through the presentation. So first of all, Halifax Water is fortunate to have completed its second integrated resource plan, which, as Kathy highlighted, identified a 30-year capital investment valued at just over $4 billion. That focused on three specific types of project drivers that make up the capital budget. That's asset renewal, compliance, and growth. And just a quick summary for context, starting with the next slide. Asset renewal is simply the life cycle replacement of all of the existing assets we have to ensure that all of our existing infrastructure, all the pipes up and down every street in the municipality, stay in a state of good repair so we can provide the services we're providing. So that is asset renewal, just keeping up with the existing infrastructure. The second category, next slide, is regulatory compliance. So there's a specific investment in infrastructure to ensure we stay compliant with current and future provincial and federal regulations, such as water quality and wastewater effluent quality. So we have a focus on staying regulatory compliant. And our third category, next slide, is to expand the capacity of our existing infrastructure to accommodate regional growth. So work with HRM and their growth projections and ensure that we expand our systems so that we can supply the capacity for our new residents and new customers. So next slide. So we peek at the IRP quickly, and it tells us this kind of a breakdown that most of our investment is on asset renewal. And that's not surprising. This is all the existing infrastructure we have and the investments required to keep it in good shape. And then we see that there is still a sizable investment in compliance and growth as well. But asset renewal is where the majority of our focus is. Next slide. If we look at the IRP from a different lens, is where are we making our investment across our three primary asset classes, wastewater, water, and stormwater. The largest is wastewater. That's the most infrastructure intensive asset class we have, mostly because of the 170 or so pumping station we have in the collection system and the 17 or so wastewater treatment plants we have out in the system, followed closely by water, and then stormwater is our smallest infrastructure. So you'll see our annual investments tend to mimic this 30-year expenditure broken down by asset class. Next slide. This is the IRP shown in a bit of a 30-year vision based on actual projects as they were developed on an annual basis. We can see that there are peaks and valleys. A lot of those peaks occur when there's a specific facility upgrade required, a new wastewater plant to be built, a new water supply plant to be upgraded, and you can see that creates peaks and valleys. An interesting line is the average line that we've drawn through there. That's the $135 million. If we were to follow the IRP, a sustainable level of capital investment on an annual basis should be around that $135 million value, plus and minus certain years, depending on the nature of the projects we deliver. But just a bit of a vision of how the actual expenditures may occur. Next slide. So just a little bit on process. Halifax Water develops an annual one-year budget, like being presented here today, for formal approval. We also develop, for planning purposes, a 5-year capital plan, so that shows we have a vision for capital expenditures. So really, capital projects are required just so we can cost effectively and efficiently continue to provide the services we provide. Definitionally, a capital budget or a capital project or a capital budget line item is something that's worth more than $5,000 and has a life expectancy greater than 1 year. So that's the accountant direction for what gets in the budget. The capital budget development is led by engineering and information services, but is fully cross-corporate in its participation of both identifying and prioritizing candidate projects for the budget. Next. So as a review and approval process, as I mentioned, the penultimate version of this budget was presented by staff to the Audit and Finance Committee. In December, they endorsed that and gave us direction to finalize and bring it forward here. We're now in the process of seeking approval from the Halifax Water Board. Subsequent to the board's approval, we would submit the budget to the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board, who would review and approve the budget in principle, and then we're off and running to implement the projects. Next. The budget is structured according with our 3 asset categories: water, wastewater, and stormwater. But for practical purposes internally, we have a 4th category called corporate projects, which are things that provide benefit to all 3, like IT solutions, buildings, things like that. And we have a 4th category called corporate. Accounting wise, at the end of the year, we divvy up those and allocate them to water, wastewater, and stormwater. But for practical management purposes, we manage the corporate projects as a separate package. Next slide. So looking now at this year's capital budget, the 21-22, we can see the proposed wastewater, water, stormwater slice of the 126 million does mimic the IRP reflection. So we're having a very normal year relative to the allocation of wastewater, water, and stormwater investments across the utility. Next slide. Just going to go through the 4 categories now and just give you a little bit of a highlight of some of the projects we're going to be embarking on. As Kathy mentioned, the largest project in the capital budget emerging this year and will dominate the budget for the next 5 to 7 years is really an update, expansion, refit of the J.D. Klein and Lake Major water supply plants. And that will address a whole host of issues regarding life cycle, climate change, lake quality issues, and it's a fundamental program. That total program, and it's detailed a little bit more in the report in the package, is valued at about $230 million over 7 to 10 years. This year, we'll see the design start for the clarifiers at the 2 facilities. This is the core process component of these 2 facilities that really is the foundation to the balance of the upgrade of those programs. In addition to that, we are doing the design work for a water transmission main loop on Wingate to provide additional resiliency in the Sackville and Fall River area of our service delivery area. We have a ongoing water distribution main renewal program, life cycle replacement of mains on each and every street in the municipality on a priority basis. With approvals from the URB, we are expanding our lead service line replacement program now with the ability to work on the private side in conjunction with the public side. We're optimistic on delivering an enhanced lead service line replacement program this year. Right in the backyard of our operations here at 450, we're replacing the Cowie Hill Reservoir. There's an approval later in the agenda on that specific project. And we're optimistically continuing to work with HRM in hopes that we will get to construction perhaps later this fall for the Cogswell redevelopment project. And there's significant work to do there, including some major water transmission mains relocation in conjunction with that project. Next slide. This just gives you a simple slice of we are doing a lot of activities that's shared around the many components of water. I won't go into that in great detail. It's in the report. Wastewater is next. So about $76 million investment in wastewater. One of the large projects is a new tunnel that is being constructed in the Fairview Cove area to add regional capacity to the wastewater system as identified in our infrastructure master plan. We also continue to do a series of trenchless rehabilitation projects where we're aligning existing collection sewers to reinstate the structural integrity and extend their life cycle across the system. We're also doing a host of integrated projects with HRM Streets program, whereas the streets are paved, we repair any requirements on the wastewater system in advance. An interesting II reduction program is in the Alberta Lake area, where historically a portion of the Alberta Lake watershed stormwater outflow drained into the combined sewers and made its way to the Dartmouth treatment facility. We're creating a dedicated outlet line from that watershed to the harbor to divert all of that water away from the wastewater treatment facility to create capacity within that facility for growth and to reduce operational costs. We're doing some normal rehabilitation to some of our force mains and our pump stations, looking at Morris Lake, Russell Lake force mains, doing a series of pump station rehabs. We're eliminating a pump station in Punch Bowl, all about life cycle cost and efficiency improvements. Some upgrades to the Halifax Wastewater Plant, where we're replacing some of the fine screens for process efficiency and life cycle upgrades. And again, doing wastewater relocation work in conjunction with Cogswell. And as Sushil alluded to earlier, we're getting started on a brand new fresh vision of Biosolids Processing, including preliminary design work this year. Next slide. Just a graph to show we're being fair to all the sub-asset classes within wastewater. And we'll go to stormwater. Our smallest asset class, but still important to make the annual investments. Again, in conjunction with the HRM Streets program, we invest in any stormwater upgrades in streets prior to projects being repaved. We also own and are responsible for a large volume of driveway culverts in our more rural areas of the community and all of the cross culverts. And so we have an aggressive program to make sure they stay in a high state of good repair. We're continuing with phase 5 of our Ellenvale Run retaining wall system, the large stormwater system that runs down through the areas of Dartmouth that we're replacing collapsed retaining walls in that system. And also within Cogswell, there is storm sewer investment as that area is redeveloped. Next slide, just to show that we're balancing our investment within the stormwater asset class. And then on to corporate projects. As Kathy mentioned, within the IT strategic plan section of corporate projects, our major projects will be the enterprise resource planning solution that we talked about earlier, and also some core investments in cybersecurity, just to improve the safety of how the utility operates. In addition, we invest heavily in corporate flow monitoring. This is in the wastewater collection system. In order to be able to manage your system well, you have to know the flows that are going through your system. So a lot of flow monitoring to better know how our system works so we can better manage it. Also, we are doing the detailed design portion of our new Burnside operations facility. We now have land for that facility. We have a consultant engaged, and we're doing the detailed design process for that facility through the next fiscal year. And as always, we continue to do the appropriate upgrades to our fleet program within our corporate project sector. Next slide. So my team has had the opportunity to put together this large capital project list, and then working with our friends in accounting and finance have developed the funding schema that takes advantage of depreciation, debt, regional development charge, and external funding as it is available. It's important to note, if you think back to those first 3 drivers, the growth driver, we hold a strong premise that growth pays for growth. And so our regional development charges are our primary funding source for growth-related infrastructure. So you can see there's actually fairly large investments from RDC on an annual basis, and that funds the growth component of our system. So these are the funding sources that align with the operating budget to fund our capital. Our capital this year is $126 million. It's a bit larger than last year due to a couple of anomalously large projects like the enterprise resource planning system, the tunnel, the reservoir, and the start of the upgrades to the water supply plants, but starts to hint at the type of sustainable investment we're going to require in accordance with the integrated resource plan. Next slide. Too large to see, but it's a summary of the capital budget that is attached to your report. And with that, I think we can take any questions you may have on the capital budget.
Thanks very much, Jamie. Prior to taking any questions, could I have a motion to put this on the floor, please?
I'll do it.
Thanks,
I
Ed.
move that the Halifax Water Board approve the proposed 2021-22 capital budget at a total value of $126,209,000 as detailed in attached Schedule 1. I so move.
I'll second that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kent. Ted, you had your hand up for a question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jamie, for the presentation. The total amount of 126 million, and I just compare that to the IRP, which I know is, really only an approximation. I think it was like almost twice as much for this year. I was just wondering if there's anything that you could single out as saying why there's a big difference between those values.
Yeah, good question. And you're right in your observation. The IRP is a wonderful planning document, but that's what it is. It's a planning document, gives us vision, gives us direction. It's very much a top-down assessment of where the utility needs to be. Our annual budget is very much a bottom-up on the grounds. What are the specific projects that need to be done? However, I would suggest that probably the biggest delta is the timing on our water supply plant program. When the IRP was put together based on master plan studies that were developed in 2017, 2018 that led to a 2019 IRP, there would have been a vision of that investment. As we've now actually practically been putting together the business plans, developing the preliminary designs, there is probably a year or two lag in the delivery of that program. That would be tens of millions of dollars in the delta there. That would be the primary reason. Other than that, it's mostly just timing reasons for highlighted projects. And there's a little bit of slice of, despite a a grand vision of the IRP level of spend, we may not quite be corporately in a position to spend that level of money. So we are trying to increase our ability to spend on capital through rates and other programs.
That makes sense. Thank you very much, Jamie. No further questions.
Any other questions for Jamie? Boy, they like you, Jamie. You know, you got off easy.
That is quarter to 12.
Yeah, exactly. Then we'll call for the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any objections? Abstentions? Motion carried. Thank you very much.
Thank
So we'll move on to the proposed 2021-22 operating budget. Louis, are you speaking to this, or is Alan?
I am.
Okay.
I just want to say how excited I was that Jamie still considers, after all of this, that his finance and accounting are still his friends. So that's from my perspective. So there's a presentation in front of you. Process is very similar to the one that Jamie outlined in terms of our approval process. We do start with our forecast as we've got as to the end of December. We will look at the business plan, which you've seen. We see the capital budget and how it impacts our costs, both on how the projects that have been completed to date and the terms of the funding that we need to cover the 21-22 capital spend. We also look at the impact of those on our debt and our depreciation, and I'll run through some of those key items as we go through the process. The first slide that we have here is just a quick look at where we are in terms of our forecast. Our budget was about $15.9 million in terms of a deficit. We have seen improvements in that. We have seen improvements related to things that are affected by COVID-19 as we presented to the URB in our rate application. So things like training, conferences have gone down. Some of our mileage and our costs related to our fleet have gone down as our current look at all of our expenditures. So we have seen that translate into the savings that you see here in front of you. One of the things that I would flag, and I'll touch on it later on in the presentation as well, is our accumulated surpluses. When we went to the UARB for our rates as a process, as part of keeping our rates stable for another year in terms of 2021, we did indicate that we were going to make withdrawals out of our accumulated surpluses. And in the case of wastewater, we would be looking to some of our reserves that we had since the transfer from HRM. So we'll have a slide that sort of shows how that plays out as we get close to the end of the presentation. If you can go one step forward. Thank you. So some of the key assumptions that we have on the revenue side, you'll hear this several times. We've maintained a flat consumption from our budget in 2021 into 21-22. We have an allocation or additional increase related to the new customers. So we have about 638 new customers, which is sort of our historic trend. Throughout, when we talk about the wastewater side in more detail, we did get approval to increase our rates from the current rate of 1.753 per cubic meter to 2.073. That generates approximately $10 million in new revenue on the wastewater side. We did get approval to adjust our public and private fire protection rates. Those came into effect October. So the 21-22 will be the first year that those increased rates, the first full year that those increased rates will be reflected in our budget. We did have miscellaneous charges that we proposed and got approval for effective April 1, 2021. So those, as much as they're not a significant part of our revenue source, they are reflected in the budget. Probably the most significant of those was a meter reading charge for non-AMI customers. So I think we've talked about this at length. That charge is starting to be applied to bills in starting January 1st, 2021. So we have incorporated that into our budget going forward into 21-22. Next slide, please. On the expenditure side, one of our significant costs, of course, is salaries. We have our union contracts. We have those up on the screen. On the non-union side, salary increases are tied to CPI. So we've estimated CPI will be about 0.75%. There's an additional component that we build into the non-union side for people who might be moving within the organization that would result in sort of salary increases. So we've built in about 0.5% into that. We do have in our budget approximately 21.75 new FTEs. So what we traditionally present to the board and what we've done here again are the new positions. So as in many organizations, we have some pluses and minuses as we go through, but what we want to make sure is before the board are specifically the new positions. So there are about 20.75 of those, represent an increase to the operating budget of about 1.5%. We do have the restructuring that Kathy spoke to built in. So we have the elimination of the director's position, the 2 new senior manager positions. And as you look through the detail, you will see that with our restructuring, we have moved pieces around the organization. So you'll see some of those changes reflected in the detail. For the first time, Halifax Water has implemented a vacancy factor. So that vacancy factor represents 1% of our gross salaries, our salary and wages. And that's really to reflect that there is normal churn within the organization. As people move, as people leave, there's an inherent savings built into that. What we've tried to do is build that into our budget, so we'll be held accountable to meeting that number as well. So here's our quick summary of the new positions. So they're across the organization. Probably the biggest area is engineering and technology services. So some of those are, or many of those are reflecting changes in our business or increasing needs related to new systems that we've implemented. Some of them will be funded or in its entirety or partially through our capital program as they're required to support our capital program. Go to the next slide. So on the operating expenditure side, we've built in increases related to key things like energy, natural gas, furnace oil. We do not anticipate an increase this year. Traditionally, we add in about a 5% increase for our chemical prices. So that represents an increase of about $300,000. A new line for us, or the expansion of the dividend that we pay to HRM and related to our, as a grant in lieu to them. Traditionally, we paid that, I think it's 1.56% of our water assets starting in this fiscal year 2021, and for the first time in a first full year 21-22, we'll be adding a 0.25% of our asset payment to HRM. So that new payment on stormwater and wastewater assets increases our cost by about $500,000. So combined, we are proposing a budget with a net deficit of about $11.6 million. We'll go through those in more detail as on the individual services. So I don't plan to spend too much time on this slide. So specifically on water services, that we have the operating revenues of about $58 million. We see a 3% increase, mostly related to the fire protection increases that I referenced earlier. There have been no rate increases either on the base rate charge or the consumption charges for water. So those rates have been in place since 2016. As I mentioned earlier, we are continuing to, we informed the URB that we will be withdrawing money from our accumulated surpluses to offset the deficit. So you'll see that reflected as we go forward here. On the operating expense side, most of the increase we're looking at are related to depreciation. As we'll see, we increase the amount of assets, we bring them into service. Depreciation is increased throughout. You can go to the next slide, please. So this is the summary for water services. We end up with a net deficit of about $5.2 million. In our conversations with URB earlier, we estimated that the deficit would be closer to 6.5. So we've seen some improvement there. Most of the differences relate to our estimates or refinement of our estimates on our depreciation. We have included some of the new initiatives that both Kathy and Jamie referenced in terms of the lead service line, dam maintenance and improvements, and a deferral of the lagoon cleaning costs that are built into the water services budget. On the wastewater side, this is where you'll see the significant increase in the revenue. It all relates to the consumption rates that we got approved by the URB. As I said earlier, that increases our revenue by about $10 million. On the operating expense side, an increase of about 6%. Some of that related to new positions, some of it related to increases in depreciation. We'll go to the next slide. So our summary here for wastewater, even with the increases in our rates, we're still budgeting to have approximately $1.5 million as a deficit. We do think that our accumulated surpluses are sufficient to cover that, but we will be managing throughout the year to try to reduce that through our projections going forward. You can go to the next slide, please. So stormwater, on the stormwater side, revenues have been maintained. We are proposing no increases in revenue. What I will say is we are going through our review of the impervious area. As we get that information, to the extent that we have increases in the impervious area, we do anticipate that there will be some increases in our revenue. On the operating side, the main change and the main driver is, again, depreciation, about $700,000 of an increase there. You can go to the next slide, please. So here's our summary. We're anticipating a deficit of about $4.9 million on the stormwater side. As I referenced earlier, we do anticipate that the increase in impervious area will offset some of that reduction or some of that deficit. So here's the slide that I referenced, referencing our accumulated surplus. So you can see that we, even with the deficits that we're proposing, both water and wastewater will continue to have accumulated surpluses. Our current surpluses are in the 9% range. We're anticipating or hoping or traditionally planned for about a 3% of accumulated or of total expenses, sorry. What we do see is that on the stormwater side that we have at the end of this year with the budget we proposed, we would have a projected accumulated deficit. But as I mentioned, as the impervious area increases, we do anticipate that some of that deficit will be reduced. You can go to the next slide, please. So as another part of our budget and what we specifically have as our motion is a reference to the sponsorship programs that Halifax Water conducts. The list is there. It's about $33,000. That is a specific part of the motion, so we wanted to make sure that was in front of you here as well. And then the last slide is just a repeat of the recommendation. And happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, Louis. So prior to moving to any questions, can I have a motion, please?
I can make a motion if you like, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much.
So I would move that the operating budget prepared for 2021-22 is based on year 2. Oh, sorry. Recommended that the board approve the attached proposed 2021-22 operating budget, inclusive of the proposed 2021-22 budget for unregulated activities. And it's further recommended that the board approve the list of 2021-22 sponsorships totaling $33,100. So
Thank you
moved.
very much. Thank you very much. Can I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councillor Lovelace. Any questions for Louis, ladies and gentlemen?
Mr. Chair, I have a question. I thought I had a question, but I actually just found an answer for it, so I'll let it go.
Okay. My God, Louis, they like you more than they like Jamie.
I don't know if that's true, but I do.
Okay, no further questions. Can I have a, can we move forward to the question, please? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any objections? Abstentions? Motion carried. Thank you very much, Louis.
Thank you.
So moving on to item, the next item on our agenda, which is the capital expenditures and forecast for the 9 months ended December 31st. Can we go forward with that presentation, please?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to have to step out because I have another meeting to attend.
That's fine.
But,
We're
I was
going
gonna
to start dropping like flies over the next half hour. So
Just 5.1 is just for information. It doesn't need discussion. The only thing that is left with a motion on it is 5.2.
well, why don't we do this? If it doesn't require discussion, if everybody's okay with it, well, can we move to item 5.2 while we still have quorum? And then, if people have to drop off on an information report, that's not catastrophic to us. So if we can, let's move to item 5.2, please. Which
Great.
is the Cowie Hill Reservoir replacement. So is Jamie speaking to this, I'm assuming, Kathy?
I don't think we'll go in detail. It's just a straightforward replacement. It's a $7.6 million project to replace the reservoir behind the building at 450 Cowie Hill, which is at the end of its useful life. And essentially the report that's in the package details the work and studies that have been done that led us to that conclusion. And in terms of the costing and the validation for that, there's also some information there in the report. So if you have questions, Jamie can answer them.
Okay, well, prior to moving to questions, then can I have a motion, please?
Mr. Chair, I'll put that motion on the floor.
Okay, can you read the motion?
Move that Halifax Water Board approve funding for the Cowie Hill Reservoir Replacement Project at an estimated cost of $7,610,000. So moved.
Thank you. A second?
Commissioner Rawlings can second.
Excellent. Any questions for Mr. Hannum? Everybody must be getting hungry. No questions.
It was a very detailed report.
It
It
was
was.
very detailed, and I think the questions were anticipated, and so the report is fulfilling. Thank you.
Thank you.
And it doesn't sound like there's much of a choice but to make the replacement. So
No.
let's call for the question. All in favor?
Motion.
Aye.
Aye.
Any objections? Abstentions? Motion approved. So that concludes the major business. Why don't we go back to 5.1, which is an information report.
So I'll let Jamie speak to this. Basically, it's the next REV enhancement of our capital reporting.
All right, thank you, Kathy. So item 5.1 is an information report, and this is a first version. So we are certainly, between Louis and I, excited about building on this to start to show more detailed, more accurate, more timely information on capital spend as we proceed throughout the year. So This is meant to be a first glimpse. We have every indication that we'll make this a broader document with more detail, and we'd be able to reflect on any feedback you may have to enhance that. But generally what we're trying to represent is, as you recall my previous discussion there, we have a large annual capital budget that we get approved, and we have a corporate goal to try to maximize the spend on that. This is just the financial tracking to see how we're making progress-wise on that capital spend. Now, it looks a little complicated and it looks a little rough because we're just getting it started, but the foundational things that we're trying to show here is that there's a total dollar value of budget approved for a long list of individual capital projects. And that's really, if you're looking at the, I don't know if you folks are looking at the report or not. I know it's not on the screen. There's a table that is the centerpiece of this report. Oh, there we go. That's very helpful. So whether you're looking at it here or looking at your own copy, this is the centerpiece of the report. And like I said, this is a starter foundational table. The total budget available is a key line item that just basically that's our target spend for the year. What we're able to show over under total expenditures to December 31st, that's an actual spend coming out of our financial system. So that's the first piece of information. What has been spent to December 31st, and that's the 56 million. What's important to note is that's a cash expenditure, so that may lag significantly actual work done in the field. So if we've laid a new water main in the month of November, and then come the end of November, we count up the quantities, and then the contractor submits us an invoice in early December, and we process the invoice, and we pay that invoice the first week of January, we could be 4 to 6 to 8 weeks lagged from real work being done to the actual cash outlay. So I just show that that's the cash spent as of December 31st, but it probably reflects work done to somewhere between the 1st or end of November. So then we jump over on to the last, the second and third from last columns, where we talk about what's our forecasted spend to the end of the fiscal year and our forecasted end to the end of those projects. So of the 56 that's been outlaid in cash to date, you know, we're forecasting we'll get upwards of $86 million of that spent by the end of the fiscal year. And some of those projects will lag into next year, and we'll get another $20 million spent on those in the next year. So it does show that we are not tracking at 100% of the capital budget spent, not doing the math, but we're somewhere at or just below the 80% target based on the forecasts. And it is showing that there's a number of projects that will lag into next year. And because of the forecasted amount being lower than the total budget available, there is a number of projects throughout the year that have been determined that we've either completed under budget or are no longer priority projects that we're delivering. So what we're trying to show is a snapshot here, certain amount of dollar value available. We've spent some money to the end of December. We're forecasting a higher level spend to the end of the fiscal year to start to give you a sense that we are spending a significant amount of capital. This would probably suggest that we're probably below total target spend. But that's where we would have a variance discussion. There's a lot of anomalous projects this year where the projects have been deferred to later years, such as HRM were delayed on the delivery of their Cogswell project. So budget investments planned for this current fiscal year on Cogswell, we have not been able to deliver on. There's a couple of projects where we were stalled in getting land acquisition from some of our partner agencies where the construction was planned for this year. We're still trying to optimize the land acquisition, so the construction project had to move into next year. There's a couple of projects where we were lagged on approvals from the Nova Scotian Utility Review Board. A good example would be the large sewer project on South Park Street, where we got into some extended discussion, positive discussion with the URB on II reduction and a bunch of other issues, and the approval lagged somewhat such that it wasn't appropriate to start the construction late in the fall and have it drift into winter, so we put it off till spring. A couple of projects where we were delayed with Nova Scotia environment permits because there were certain sensitivities around timing and impact on fish and other things like that, where the permit period lagged and it was more appropriate to do the project in the spring than the fall. So I think in the future, we'll start to talk about some variance analysis and discussion on what makes up this. But today's report was to be a first cut to show that we are accurately accounting for the amount of dollars spent against capital and forecasting where we'll be at end of fiscal and end of project. And Louis, if you had anything to add to that, I would welcome it.
I must say it's been a great process, and Jamie and his team have been very, very supportive as we move forward. Really interested in terms of developing and continuing to enhance what we have and providing that next level of detail of analysis to the board as well. So it's been a great process so far.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. You know, quite frankly, this is very helpful for the board, because this issue of being able to track the capital spend, because depreciation, moving projects to completion is so important in terms of the continuing refreshing of capital. This is very helpful for the board from a monitoring perspective. I really do appreciate your work on this. Does anybody have any questions? Colleen, would you like to make that, you know, that comment out loud? Or?
I was just suggesting to staff, I think the report's fabulous, and Jamie, you're recording percentages. So if there's room on the page, if you could put the percentages, would be really helpful too.
Yep, no, very, very good point. Yep.
You had
I have one question, Mr. Chair.
Yep, please.
Thank you. When we look at any projects that get deferred from one year to the next, I'm just wondering, in the forecast, is there an allowance for if there needs to be an amendment, if there is like change orders, or if there's an increase in cost based on going into another year?
Yeah, I mean, all of that detail is captured within our project funding approval process.
Okay.
And so as a project evolves and we see it going into the next year, and there is required additional funding, there is increase in budgets and appropriate approvals for that funding. And that, in a summary fashion, gets shown here in the total budget available. Behind that total budget available, there would be the initial approval, any subsequent additional approvals based on change orders, and so there's some math in behind that we could show the 2 or 3 part harmony that would make up the total budget on an individual project. In behind this, there's 300 or 400 active projects, each of which have their individual approved budget, and each of those budgets may be an original budget plus some additional funding based on change orders or forecasted. So we can look at opportunities, even make that 400 project report list available. So I think that's a good observation to maybe better understand. I think my first reply would be that yes, the total budget's inclusive of all the provisions we've made for increasing costs as projects evolve, and we can look at maybe opportunities to choose to show that or not.
I was just wondering about how we acknowledge what the risk might be. So that's an excellent answer. Thank you. And a beautiful report. If I may, just one other question, and that is, if there are changes to any of the procurement policies, especially as it may relate to social procurement or anything like that, most of these are already contracted and awarded, I would think. So if there's a change, procurement would be on any go forward project for capital. Would I be right in assuming that?
Yeah, more so. These would all be kind of mostly in-flight projects. There may still be some late procurement stages to some of these, but I think an adjustment to a procurement policy would have more impact or concern as we align it with the proposed budget for 21-22, as there's a full slate of procurement for most of those projects going forward. So we'd be mindful of it more with respect to the go forward budget.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? Hearing none. Thank you very much, Jamie and Louis. That's very helpful. Appreciate your work on it. And that is the end of the business on our agenda, unless anybody has anything else. I'm calling for a motion for adjournment. Moved by Councillor Kent.
Yep.
Got a second?
You don't need a seconder.
Don't need a second, then we can leave now? Thanks, Heidi.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
day.